our first episode, we're going to talk about solventless extraction of the trichome head. What I really want to do is encourage people to think more about what they're consuming and get back in touch with that plant instead of just the flashy packaging and things like that, right? So let's understand the plant a bit more, and let's start with the trichome and the trichome head. When we're smoking something, that's what's getting us high. When we're vaping it, that's what's getting us high. When we're eating it, that's what's getting us high. Believe it or not, that trichome head. So there's a bunch of different ways to get that head, right? So what is a trichome head? Let's start there. So if you're looking at a plant and you see the sugary, star, diamondy, sparkly stuff on it, the sticky stuff on it, that's a trichome, and that's a trichome head. There's a stalk with a ball on top. The head is where the most concentration of cannabinoids and terpenes is. The THC and the other stuff that gets you high, as well as the terpenes, which are really what you're smelling and what you're tasting when you're consuming those products. All that good stuff is on the head, right? What we're doing now when we start doing extracts of all types is removing the excess material around that head, the leaf matter, the plant matter, right? The plant was necessary, and the flower was necessary to get to that resin head, that gland, that resin gland. Extracts are just that. They are an extraction from the plant material to capture that head, or that oil that's inside that head really, and give it to you in a smokable, vapable, eatable, whatever format. There's different methods to go about getting that head off of a plant. Okay, let's go to the simplest method. Let's go back to really what hash is, okay? You rub your hand on that plant, finger hash, boom, you just extracted hash off the plant, right? That right there, that sticky stuff, or that glove hash, if you're a trimmer or you've been working with plants, extraction right there. We can take another simple method, flower rosin, where a lot of people got started. I got started in the flower rosin game. Taking a bud, a flower, a nug, and actually squishing it under heat and pressure, and it releases oil, right? And you see that rosin come out, that oil. That's extracting the heads and leaving the plant material behind. What about solvents? Okay, so we hear about solventless methods. We hear about solvent methods. What does that mean? BHO is a term that gets thrown around a lot. Butane, butane hash oil. CO2 can be used to do this. Solvents can be used to essentially strip all those oils off the plant material too. And the idea with a solvent-based extraction like butane is you use a solvent, you strip all that oil off, and then you purge the solvent off, and what you're left with is just the cannabis oil. That's possible because, like we said, all that stuff is on the outside of the plant, right? All that stuff that's attached to the leaves, attached to the buds, attached to the flowers, even attached to the stems can be stripped right off, leave the green behind, purge off the chemicals that were used, so that now you're left with just the cannabis oil. That's a solvent-based extract. Butane, hash oil, BHO, sauce, diamond shatter. That's what that is. That process, the same thing. They essentially then use vacuum ovens and a little bit of heat, a little bit of pressure, a little bit of science to remove, purge the butane or whatever other chemicals that they choose to use to do that out of the product, and you're left with a safe to consume hash oil. That same process is actually used in many industries, right? It's not just a cannabis process, but the extraction of essential oils using butane and CO2 and other things is done across everything you can imagine. Remember, we're trying to get the head is the best concentration of the good stuff. Solventlessly, you can knock it right off with your hands. You can squish it out with a hot press with the heated plates. But then there was something that we figured out called ice water hash extraction. I'm not gonna cover everything here. I'm not gonna get into dry sift as much yet, things like that. I'm not gonna say that this is the only method, but the most common thing has been ice water hash, right? And what does that mean? That means that somebody throws a bunch of material, whether it's trim or flour, whatever it is, in an ice water bath, literally cold water and ice, and agitates it around to knock those heads off the material. Remember, I said you got that head, you got a stalk, and it's attached to the plant. In theory, just like with dry sift, if you agitate that plant, you can knock the head off. Well, with frozen material, you keep it frozen, you keep it brittle, you throw it in that ice water, and you knock the head off. Now, you're left with this watery, slurry mix that has all of these hash heads, these trichome heads, these terpenes, everything in them. In order to extract those, you have to filter it out through a mesh screen, right? So what we do at Kalikori is we have different micron bags we call them, or mesh screens that we pour that water through. And what we're left with is kind of like what you get when you rub your fingers all over a bud. You're left with hash, just a cleaner, fresher, more stable version of that. Trichome heads, that's a whole lot of them. They're microscopic. But when you get that many together, right? Now, that's not the end of that process. You collect those heads, but here's why I'm telling you all this. Those heads have to be intact to be collected. Okay? So if I beat that material up, or even if the material is too fragile and it breaks up when I'm washing it, it's possible that those trichome heads will just become oil and run right down through the mesh in the bags, right? And the smallest micron that we personally collect is 40 micron. So anything smaller than that, essentially anything that's been broken down into a liquid form, will fall right down through that. Now, the reason why I bring that up is I talked to you before about butane extracts. Butane extracts don't run into that same problem. They're going to strip that plant material of all the oil, pull it down, and then filter it out at a microscopic level, like a 1 micron filter, right? I told you we're going to 40 micron. They might go to 5 or 1 even, or something like that, right? Because they're dealing with a liquid from the beginning. They always have a liquid. We don't want that. We want intact trichome heads. The bigger the head, the stronger the head, the higher up in the collection stage it gets collected, the better it is usually. So that's why you'll see something like a live rosin. You'll see like 90 micron, or you'll see 70 to 140, or whatever those numbers are. That's the micron bags, the ice water hash bags that they use to collect that resin. Okay, so all of these different methods, it comes down to, how do I collect the trichome head? Actually, I got to go back. How do I get the stuff that's in that trichome head off the plant? Because I'm saying, as an extractor, I don't want the rest of it. I just want the juice that's in that head. I want the good stuff in there. In my world, we do it solventlessly. We use ice and water. We knock it off. We agitate it. We spoon that out, and we put it on a tray. And we run it through a thing called a freeze dryer, because we got to still remove the water from that. There's still water left in it, right? So the butane guys have to remove the butane. We have to remove the water. Run that process through a freeze dryer. It used to be that you would actually lay that out and air dry it over time. Now we use a freeze dryer to do that. There's a whole long explanation about this. I'll probably drop an episode just about freeze drying to kind of give you guys some of that knowledge. But we throw it in that machine, come back 2 days later, pull it out. We're left with sandy, dry hash, trichome heads, intact trichome heads, not mushed up heads that are all together, but intact trichome heads. That's why it looks like sand. That's why it flows, and it's like that. Now, funny enough, what we're going to do then is take those intact, beautiful trichome heads and squish the oil out of them, right? So most of it is oil and good stuff, but there's still some contaminant there, right? Even a trichome head has extra material. We're going after that oil on the inside of the head. So that's what rosin is. Rosin, live rosin specifically, is that we've done an ice water hash extraction. We've filtered those heads out through our bags. We've freeze dried the hash, and now we're left with this sandy hash, raw hash off the plant. Essentially the same thing as doing dry sift or finger hash off of a dry bud, but we've done it with fresh, frozen, live material. Chopping the plant down live, throwing it in the freezer, and extracting it that way. Then we take that hash, we put it in even smaller filter bags. So I go to a 25 micron rosin filter. It's essentially like a tea filter or something like that. It's not, but that's what the closest thing you can relate it to. So we stuff it in there, and we apply light heat and pressure. This all started out using a hair straightener, and so the simplest way to picture is an expensive commercial hair straightener that we use specifically for rosin. 2 heated plates, just like a hair straightener, and we gently squish the oil right out of those trichome heads. And what's left behind in that 25 micron bag is the last bit of contaminant that we don't want, right? We've been doing this whole process to pull that oil off the plant without contaminant. And now we get it down to this point, and there's still a little bit left. We apply a little bit of heat and just squish the oils out from the bag. And what you're left with is usually a generally pretty pure, from our test results that we're seeing, in the high 90% percentage points of cannabinoids and terpenes, leaving just a little bit of extra stuff in there, if you will. Fats and lipids is what it really becomes. Maybe a little bit of plant material here and there. By plant material, I'm talking like trichome stalks, trichome heads. There's no green plant material left at this point. Anyways, that's what you're left with, is that pure oil. And that's solventless hash oil, that's live rosin, that's rosin, hash rosin, whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, though, butane extractors, solventless extractors, all trying to get to the same thing, all trying to achieve that same end goal. An ultra pure, high terpene extraction, representation, whatever you want to call it, of the plant at whatever stage you get it in. If you give trim to a butane guy, you're going to get the terpenes and the expression of the plant at the time of it as you hand that material to them. If you chop down a plant fresh frozen and throw it right in the freezer and you extract it properly, you're going to get the expression of that live plant that you could smell growing, right? That live flower. And there's a reason that a solventless concentrate ends up costing more and is often lower yield, more rare, if you will, and that's why it costs more on the market, is because, like I said, we can only extract intact trichome heads of a certain size. So this becomes one on us as an extractor to make sure that when we handle the material and we do the extraction process, we don't break those heads. But also from a grower's perspective, when they're growing and harvesting that plant, or in our case, our team, because we're single source, growing and harvesting that plant, we need to be careful with it from the point where we take it out of the room, take it off the plant, to where we bring it into the freezers and trim it up to get it to that point. It has to be handled delicately. We don't touch the buds. We hold the stems, we trim them up, we buck them down, we say right down into a bucket, throw it right into the freezer. So we don't touch those actual buds, because if we do, we'll explode the trichome heads and they'll go right down the drain. We won't be extracting those. So that's why, at the end of the day, why hash ends up being more expensive. Hash rosin, live hash rosin, ends up being more expensive than your traditional butane extract. And I'm not saying butane is bad necessarily. It has a place. It's just that there are different ways to do it, like everything in this world. And some stuff costs a little bit more money because of the process and that it goes through to get there, right? The process to create solventless live rosin is much more involved, much more delicate. You can only extract from the best of the best material, right? And that's really important. If I have material that was grown poorly or handled poorly, I cannot extract it into live rosin. If I have material that was grown and handled poorly and stomped all over, I can still extract it to butane and get something out of it. And that's why they're miracle workers over there, and we love them, because they create amazing things using science. And we do that too on the solventless side, but we have to be a bit more selective with our input material. And that's what separates really solventless and solvent-based extraction, is the input material and how you handle that input material through the entire process. What a trichome head is related to extraction, right? So again, there's a stalk with a bulbous thing on top. That ball has the oils in it. That's the stuff that gets you high. That's the stuff you smell. That's the stuff you really want. That's the good stuff. That's what we're trying to do. Whether you're extracting with solvents or solventless, you need to extract the oils from that head and pull it off the plant. Where essentially, I think it was it Mila, the hash queen, said, when you're, it's like eating a pizza, but also eating the box that the pizza came in, So when you smoke that flour, that's like eating the whole box of pizza. But when you have an extract, you took the pizza out of the box and you ate just the slice of pizza, because why would you eat the box that the pizza came in? I don't know. But that's how we look at it around here. So, personally, I love concentrates. They're my favorite way to consume cannabis. Solvent and solventless. Obviously, I prefer solventless, but hey, I'm lucky I can make it. It's easily accessible to me. There's also a time and a place for solvent-based extracts. They create amazing things. There's also certain terpenes that you just cannot extract solventlessly. You'll see that a lot in the market. Stuff that's only in BHO, only in sauce, only in shatter, because certain strains cannot be extracted to rosin. They just can't. And it comes down to that trichome head that we talked about before. There's the quality of the material grown, there's how you handle it, and then there's genetics that come into play here too. Some stuff just doesn't produce no matter what you do to it. So that's why some strains will be exclusive to either extraction type. I love cannabis. I love cannabis concentrates. I hope you do too. And I hope you learned a little bit of something today.